Jebediah lived in a world painted in shades of brown and gray. The sun-baked earth, the weathered wood of his tiny cabin, the dust that clung to everything, it all blended together into a monotonous landscape. He wasn't a bad man, just a man down on his luck. His family's ranch had been lost years ago, swallowed by debt and drought. Now, he eked out a living trapping small animals and foraging for edible plants in the sparse wilderness. His days were long and lonely. He woke before sunrise, the chill seeping through the cracks in his cabin walls. His breakfast was usually a piece of stale bread and a cup of weak coffee, brewed over a fire he'd painstakingly coaxed to life. Then he'd set out to check his traps, a rifle slung over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of danger or, less often, opportunity. Mending his clothes was a constant battle. Patches covered patches, and his boots were held together with wire and sheer willpower. Food was scarce. Sometimes he went days with nothing more than berries to eat, his stomach growling in protest. The nights were even worse. The wind howled like a hungry wolf, and the silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional screech of an owl. He missed the sound of laughter, the warmth of companionship, the simple comfort of a shared meal. He was alone, utterly and completely alone, in a world that seemed determined to break him. He was surviving, but barely. Each day was a struggle, a testament to his stubborn refusal to give up, even when hope seemed like a distant, unattainable dream. Despite the harshness of his life, Jebediah wasn't completely hardened. One sweltering afternoon, while checking his traps near a dry creek bed, he stumbled upon a tiny, injured bird. It was a sparrow, its wing bent at an unnatural angle. Most would have ignored it, perhaps even seen it as a potential meal, but Jebediah felt a pang of sympathy. He gently scooped up the bird, its tiny body trembling in his calloused hands. He carefully carried it back to his cabin, his mind already racing with ideas on how to help. He fashioned a makeshift splint from twigs and strips of cloth, his large fingers surprisingly deft as he worked. He fed the bird water from an old spoon, drop by drop, until it finally chirped weakly. He named her Hope. Each day he tended to Hope's wing, offering her what little food he could spare. He talked to her, telling her about his day, his hopes, and his fears. He knew it was silly, talking to a bird, but it eased the loneliness that gnawed at him. As Hope grew stronger, so did Jebediah's spirits. He found himself smiling more often, his eyes regaining a spark that had been missing for years. Caring for Hope filled a void in his life, a void that had been aching for connection and purpose. It was a small thing, a tiny bird, but it reminded him that even in the bleakest of circumstances, there was still room for kindness, compassion, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of hope. He didn't know it yet, but hope was just the beginning, a tiny symbol of a much larger change about to flutter into his life. The day Aurora arrived, the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. Jebediah was outside, giving Hope a flying lesson. The little bird, its wing now healed, fluttered awkwardly around his head, chirping excitedly. He was laughing, a genuine, hearty laugh that hadn't escaped his lips in years, when he saw her. She appeared as if from nowhere, a splash of color against the muted tones of the landscape. Her wagon, painted a vibrant red and pulled by two sturdy-looking horses, was tilted at an odd angle, one wheel clearly broken. But it was the woman herself who truly captured his attention. Aurora. Her name suited her perfectly. She had long, flowing hair the color of spun gold, and eyes as blue as the summer sky. She wore a dress of emerald green, adorned with intricate embroidery, a stark contrast to Jebediah's worn and faded denim. Even from a distance, he could see the intelligence and kindness in her face. He stood frozen, his mouth agape, hope forgotten for a moment as she landed on his shoulder, chirping inquisitively. He felt like he'd stepped into a dream, a beautiful woman, stranded in the middle of nowhere, looking at him with a mixture of hope and apprehension. He swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew in that instant that his life was about to change forever. The drab canvas of his existence was about to be splashed with color, with adventure, with the possibility of something more than just survival. He just had to find the courage to speak. Jebediah cleared his throat, the sound rough and unfamiliar to his own ears. "Ma'am," he finally managed, his voice a low rumble. "Looks like you've had some trouble." Aurora smiled, a radiant smile that lit up her face and sent a jolt through Jebediah's system. "Indeed," she said, her voice as melodic as a songbird's. "My wagon will decided to part ways with the rest of the vehicle. I'm afraid I'm not much of a carpenter." Jebediah, still feeling awkward and out of place, shuffled his feet. He wasn't used to talking to women, especially not women who looked like they belonged in a fancy ballroom rather than the middle of the dusty wilderness. "Well," he said, "I might be able to help with that. I'm Jebediah." "Aurora," she replied, extending a hand. Her touch was surprisingly firm, yet gentle. Jebediah's calloused hand felt clumsy and large in hers. He hesitated for a moment, then offered her a place to stay. "It ain't much," he said, gesturing towards his small cabin. "But it's shelter, and I reckon I could fix that will by morning." Aurora's eyes shone with gratitude. "That's incredibly kind of you, Jebediah. I wouldn't want to impose." "No imposition," he insisted, perhaps a little too eagerly. He found himself wanting her to stay, wanting to prolong this unexpected encounter. The thought of her leaving filled him with a strange sense of disappointment. He quickly busied himself with helping her unharness the horses and gather her belongings, his mind racing with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. He was about to have company, a beautiful woman, in his tiny cabin. His solitary world was about to be turned upside down. Inside the cabin, Jebediah felt even more self-conscious. The single room was sparsely furnished: a cot, a rough-hewn table, and a few mismatched chairs. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that streamed through the cracks in the walls. He noticed Aurora subtly taking it all in, her expression unreadable. He gestured vaguely around the room. "Sorry, it's not much," he mumbled. "But it's dry." He quickly started a fire in the hearth, hoping to dispel some of the chill and awkwardness. Aurora, however, seemed unfazed. She smiled warmly. "It's charming," she said, though Jebediah suspected she was being polite. She began unpacking a few of her belongings: a small trunk filled with clothes, a set of fine china wrapped in cloth, and a book with a leather cover. The china, especially, seemed incredibly out of place in the rustic setting. He watched her, unsure of what to do or say. He offered her the only chair that wasn't missing a leg, then retreated to the corner, feeling like a clumsy oaf. He was used to his own company, to the quiet rhythm of his solitary life. Having Aurora here was like introducing a brightly colored bird into a nest of drab twigs. He felt a strange mix of fascination and anxiety. What did she think of him? Of his home? Would she judge him for his poverty and his rough ways? He just hoped he could make her comfortable, at least for the night. He needed to figure out how to be a host, something he hadn't been in a very long time. And he needed to do it fast. The next morning, Jebediah rose early to fix Aurora's wagon wheel. He was surprised to find her already awake, humming a cheerful tune as she swept the cabin floor. "Good morning," she said, her eyes sparkling. "I thought I'd lend a hand." Jebediah, still awkward, tried to dissuade her, but Aurora was insistent. She helped him gather wood for the fire, her movements surprisingly efficient. As he worked on the wagon wheel, she offered him tips, her knowledge of carpentry surprisingly extensive. He learned she'd grown up on a farm and was quite skilled with her hands. Over the next few days, Aurora transformed Jebediah's life. She taught him how to cook using herbs and spices she'd brought with her, turning his meager meals into surprisingly flavorful feasts. She showed him how to mend his clothes more efficiently, creating stronger and neater patches. She even helped him organize his cabin, creating a sense of order and cleanliness he'd never known before. She also shared stories of her travels, of bustling cities and snow-capped mountains, of grand theaters and humble villages. Jebediah listened, captivated, his world expanding beyond the confines of his small cabin and the surrounding wilderness. Their interactions were filled with gentle humor, with shared laughter that echoed through the cabin walls. He found himself looking forward to each new day, eager to learn from her, to share stories with her, to simply be in her presence. He was starting to feel alive again, thanks to the kindness and warmth of this extraordinary woman. As the days turned into weeks, a subtle shift occurred in their relationship. The initial awkwardness faded, replaced by a comfortable ease. Jebediah found himself drawn to Aurora's infectious optimism, her unwavering kindness. He admired her strength, her resilience, and her ability to find beauty in the simplest of things. One evening, after a particularly delicious meal of rabbit stew, a recipe Aurora had perfected, they sat outside the cabin, watching the stars twinkle in the inky sky. They laughed as hope, now fully recovered, swooped and soared around them, catching insects in the twilight. Aurora leaned back against the cabin wall, her eyes shining in the starlight. "You're a good man, Jebediah," she said softly. "A truly good man." Jebediah felt his heart swell with a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. He looked at Aurora, her face illuminated by the moon, and realized he was falling in love with her. Aurora, too, began to develop feelings for Jebediah. She noticed the way he cared for Hope, the gentle way he handled the small bird, the quiet pride he took in his work. She saw beyond his rough exterior to the kind and generous heart that lay beneath. She appreciated his honesty, his humility, and his unwavering loyalty. She found herself drawn to his strength, his resilience, and his quiet determination. She realized that she was falling in love with him, too. But something held her back, a secret she couldn't bring herself to share, a shadow that clung to her past. Despite the growing affection between them, a subtle tension lingered in the air. Jebediah noticed a sadness in Aurora's eyes, a fleeting shadow that would pass over her face whenever she spoke of her past. She was always careful to avoid specifics, to steer the conversation towards safer topics. One afternoon, while they were mending clothes together, Jebediah gently broached the subject. "Aurora," he said, his voice soft, "you never talk about what you were doing before you came here." Aurora's hands stilled. She looked away, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "It's not important," she said quietly. "But it is," Jebediah insisted. "If it's bothering you, you can tell me. I'm here for you." Aurora sighed. "It's complicated, Jebediah. There are things, people, I'd rather leave behind." She paused, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm running from something." Jebediah reached out and took her hand, his touch reassuring. "Running from what?" he asked. Aurora shook her head, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and sadness. "I can't tell you," she said. "Not yet. It would put you in danger." She pulled her hand away and stood up, her face pale. "Please, Jebediah, just trust me. It's better if you don't know." Her reluctance to share her past created a wall between them, a barrier that Jebediah desperately wanted to break down. He knew that whatever she was running from was weighing heavily on her, and he longed to help her carry that burden. But he also respected her privacy, her need to protect herself. He just hoped that one day, she would trust him enough to share her secret, to let him into the darkest corners of her past. He knew, deep down, that until she did, their relationship would always be incomplete. That night, the storm arrived with a vengeance. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the cabin windows and threatening to tear the roof from its moorings. Rain lashed against the walls, turning the surrounding landscape into a muddy swamp. Lightning illuminated the sky in blinding flashes, followed by deafening claps of thunder that shook the very ground beneath their feet. Jebediah and Aurora worked together, securing the windows with wooden planks and reinforcing the roof with heavy stones. They moved the horses to a more sheltered location and gathered extra firewood, knowing they would need it to keep warm through the long night. The storm raged on, relentless and unforgiving, isolating them completely from the outside world. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled merrily, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Jebediah and Aurora huddled together, sharing stories and sipping hot coffee, trying to ignore the fury of the storm raging outside. As the night wore on, the storm intensified, testing the limits of the cabin's meager defenses. A tree branch crashed against the roof, sending a shower of debris into the room. Jebediah and Aurora exchanged worried glances. They knew they had to do something to protect themselves and the cabin. This shared danger forced them to rely on each other completely, to trust each other implicitly. In the heart of the storm, they found a new level of connection, a deeper understanding that transcended words. The storm was not just a threat, but a catalyst, forging a stronger bond between them, a bond that would be tested in the days to come. As the storm raged outside, a different kind of storm brewed within the cabin. The shared fear and the intimacy of their isolation loosened Aurora's tongue. Huddled close to the fire, she finally began to speak of her past. "My father," she said, her voice trembling. "He promised me to a man I didn't love, a wealthy landowner old enough to be my grandfather. He cared only about my family's land." She looked at Jebediah, her eyes filled with tears. "I couldn't do it. I couldn't marry someone I didn't love, someone who saw me as nothing more than property." She paused, taking a deep breath. "So I ran. I left everything behind, my family, my home, everything I knew. I knew they would send someone after me, but I had to be free." Jebediah listened intently, his heart aching for her. He reached out and took her hand, his touch offering silent comfort. "You did the right thing," he said softly. "You deserve to be happy." Aurora leaned against him, her body trembling. "I'm so scared, Jebediah," she whispered. "What if they find me? What if they force me to go back?" Jebediah wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "They won't," he said firmly. "I won't let them. I'll protect you, Aurora. Promise." In that moment, their connection deepened. Aurora finally allowed herself to be vulnerable, to share her deepest fears and secrets with Jebediah. And Jebediah, in turn, offered her his unwavering support and protection. The storm outside raged on, but inside the cabin, a sense of peace settled between them, a sense of trust and understanding that had been missing before. They were no longer just a cowboy and a stranded traveler, but two souls bound together by shared experience and a growing love. The storm finally subsided, leaving behind a world washed clean and sparkling in the morning sun. But the peace was short-lived. 2 days later, a rider appeared on the horizon, a dark silhouette against the bright sky. As he drew closer, Jebediah recognized the man's cold, calculating eyes and the cruel set of his jaw. He was dressed in black from head to toe, a low-slung holster strapped to his hip. This was no ordinary traveler. "That's him?" Aurora whispered, her voice filled with dread. "That's Silas, my father's most trusted enforcer." Silas dismounted, his movements deliberate and menacing. He strode towards the cabin, his boots crunching on the gravel. "I'm looking for Aurora," he said, his voice raspy and devoid of emotion. "She belongs with her family." Jebediah stepped forward, placing himself between Silas and Aurora. "She's staying with me," he said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. Silas sneered. "Get out of my way, cowboy. This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me," Jebediah retorted. "Aurora is my friend, and I won't let you take her against her will." Silas's eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake," he said, his hand hovering near his gun. "A very big mistake." He was a bounty hunter in all but name, a ruthless man used to getting his way through intimidation and violence. He wouldn't hesitate to use force to bring Aurora back, and Jebediah knew he had to protect her, even if it meant risking his own life. The showdown had begun. Jebediah knew he was outmatched. Silas was a seasoned gunslinger, a man with years of experience in violence. Jebediah, on the other hand, was just a poor cowboy who knew how to trap rabbits and mend fences. But he had something Silas didn't, a deep love for Aurora and a fierce determination to protect her. And he knew the land. Every hidden gully, every treacherous ravine, every winding path was etched in his memory. "I'm giving you one last chance," Cowboy, Silas said, his voice dripping with menace. Step aside, or you'll regret it. Jebediah stood his ground. I won't let you hurt her, he said, his voice surprisingly steady. He turned to Aurora. Get inside, he instructed, and stay there. As Aurora hurried into the cabin, Jebediah turned and disappeared into the wilderness. He knew he couldn't face Silas in a direct confrontation. His only hope was to use his knowledge of the land to his advantage, to outsmart the pursuer. He set simple traps, tripwires that would send Silas sprawling, camouflaged pits that would slow him down. He led Silas on a wild goose chase, luring him deeper and deeper into the treacherous terrain. He knew he was playing a dangerous game, but he was willing to risk everything to protect the woman he loved. His courage, born not of recklessness but of love, fueled his every move. He was no longer just a poor cowboy. He was Aurora's protector, and he wouldn't let her down. The chase led them to a narrow canyon, a natural dead end. Silas, his face flushed with anger and frustration, finally cornered Jebediah. He dismounted, his gun drawn. It's over, Cowboy, he snarled. There's nowhere left to run. Jebediah stood his ground, his own rifle held loosely at his side. He knew he couldn't win in a gunfight, but he had one last trick up his sleeve. You don't have to do this, Silas, he said, his voice calm and steady. Aurora doesn't want to go back. Can't you see that? Silas hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. I have my orders, he said, his voice less certain than before. Orders can be changed, Jebediah countered. Think about it, Silas. Is this really the life you want? Enforcing someone else's will, taking away someone else's freedom? Jebediah's words struck a chord. Silas had always been a pawn, a tool used by powerful men. He had never questioned his orders, never considered the consequences of his actions. But now, looking at Jebediah's unwavering gaze, he began to see things differently. Slowly, Silas lowered his gun. Maybe you're right, he said, his voice barely audible. He holstered his weapon and turned away. Tell Aurora. Tell her I won't bother her again. With that, Silas mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Jebediah standing alone in the canyon. He had won, not with violence, but with words, with compassion, with the newfound confidence that Aurora had awakened in him. He had proven that even a poor cowboy could stand up to injustice and protect the ones he loved. He had changed. With Silas gone, the immediate threat had passed. But a new challenge loomed. Aurora was free to return to her old life, to the wealth and privilege she had left behind. The question was, did she want to? Jebediah watched her, his heart heavy with uncertainty. He knew he couldn't offer her the kind of life she was used to. He was just a poor cowboy, with nothing but a small cabin and a love for the land. He was afraid that his simple existence wouldn't be enough for her. Aurora saw the worry in his eyes. She knew she had a difficult choice to make. On the one hand, she could return to her family, to the comfort and security she had always known. She could try to reconcile with her father, to find a way to live within the constraints of her old life. But that would mean sacrificing her freedom, her independence, and the love she had found with Jebediah. On the other hand, she could stay with Jebediah, embracing a life of simplicity and hardship. She would have to learn to live without the luxuries she had always taken for granted, to adapt to a world that was vastly different from the one she had known. But she would be free to be herself, free to love Jebediah without reservation. The weight of the decision pressed down on her, crushing her with its immensity. She knew that whatever she chose, her life would never be the same again. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with both promise and peril. The morning Aurora made her decision dawned clear and bright. She stood beside Jebediah, watching the sunrise paint the sky with vibrant colors. She turned to him, her eyes filled with love and determination. I'm staying, she said, her voice firm and unwavering. I'm staying with you. Jebediah's heart soared. He reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle and reassuring. Are you sure? He asked. It won't be easy. I know, Aurora replied, smiling. But I'd rather face any hardship with you than live a life of luxury without you. She knew that her decision would likely mean a permanent break with her family, but she was prepared to pay that price for her freedom and for her love for Jebediah. They embraced, their bodies pressed close together, a silent promise of love and loyalty. They would face the future together, whatever it may bring. They would build a life together, brick by brick, fueled by their love and their shared dreams. From that day forward, Aurora embraced her new life with gusto. She learned to garden, to hunt, to mend fences alongside Jebediah. She brought beauty and joy to his simple existence, transforming his cabin into a warm and welcoming home. They were a team, partners in every sense of the word. They faced challenges together, celebrated triumphs together, and supported each other through thick and thin. Their love grew stronger with each passing day, a testament to the power of connection and the transformative effect of kindness. Aurora's arrival had changed Jebediah's life forever, and he knew that he would never be the same. He was no longer just a poor cowboy surviving in the wilderness. He was a man loved and cherished, a man with a purpose and a future. Years passed. Jebediah and Aurora lived a full and happy life in their small cabin. They worked hard, they loved deeply, and they faced whatever challenges came their way with unwavering courage and determination. They never had much money, but they were rich in love, in friendship, and in the simple joys of life. Hope, the sparrow, lived a long and happy life, becoming a symbol of their enduring love and connection. She nested in the eaves of the cabin, her cheerful chirping a constant reminder of the kindness and compassion that had brought them together. Jebediah was no longer the same man who had eked out a lonely existence in the wilderness. He was more confident, more resourceful, and more open to the world around him. He had learned to appreciate the beauty of simplicity, the power of connection, and the transformative effect of love. He was still a poor cowboy, but he was a rich man in every way that truly mattered. He often thought about the day Aurora arrived, about the broken wagon wheel and the splash of color against the drab landscape. He knew that her arrival had been a turning point in his life, a moment that had changed him forever. He was grateful for her love, for her kindness, and for her unwavering belief in him. He knew that he would never forget her, and that her presence would continue to shape his life for years to come. He had learned that even in the bleakest of circumstances, there was always hope for a brighter future, for a life filled with love, purpose, and joy, and that, he knew, was a gift worth more than all the riches in the world.